My first wholesale deal involving a house was located in Jacksonville, Florida, and was a pre-foreclosure. The sellers fell behind on their payments after unforeseen medical expenses and ended up falling behind about $20,000 in what is known as arrears. These people are very kind and hardworking and have been throughout their whole life, so it's very sad to see these unfortunate events in their life. I first made contact with them in May of 2023, where we went over on how to avoid foreclosure. If you're curious how I got the lead, go check out my previous video where I show how I got free and unlimited leads using PropWire. After going over with the seller their 8 options on how to avoid foreclosure, they took some time to think about it. Meanwhile, I continued to follow up. After some time had passed, they finally reached out and said that they were willing to sell it using creative finance. Their situation looked something like this. The remaining principal on their loan was for $180,000, and they were behind about $20,000. And after analyzing the property, we decided the house is worth about $280,000, which leaves about an $80,000 spread. Considering the situation they're in, they decided that creative finance got them the most amount of money for their house. So we structured the deal as follows. The buyer would take over the original loan subject to leaving the seller's names on the loan, and he would also pay $20,000 to cover the arrears. This not only restores the loan, but also restores the seller's credit score. The remaining spread of the house would be seller finance. This is what's called a hybrid deal. And the seller finance terms are broken down as follows. The buyer would pay the seller $10,000 as a down payment. The sellers would then finance the remaining amount with 3% interest with a 7-year balloon, which means the remaining principal will be paid at the end of 7 years, which equaled about $24,000. With this structure, it not only restores the seller's credit, but it also gives them money in their pocket up front, passive income every month, and then money to look forward to in 7 years. Once the sellers and I agreed on the deal, we signed a purchase agreement locking in the terms, with a 15-day inspection and a 30-day close. The 15-day inspection period and the 30-day close give me enough time to find a buyer. Unfortunately for this deal, I didn't already have a buyer lined up. I don't suggest this, as the 30 days became quite stressful, as you'll soon find out. Once the purchase agreement was signed, we sent it over to our transaction coordinator, who opened up escrow with a title company who is investor-friendly and capable of handling creative deals. Once the transaction coordinator opened up escrow, that gave us 48 hours to submit our earnest money deposit. For this deal, it was $600. Once the purchase agreement was signed, my partner, who is helping me get my first deal, and I started aggressively looking for buyers. We first reached out to buyers within our network who would be interested in buying the property. After seeing there wasn't much interest, we then reached out to people on Facebook real estate groups within the Jacksonville area. Facebook groups are great if your buyer network isn't very large like mine was at the time, but you'll also get a lot of messages and interest from other wholesalers who are trying to take part of your deal. This is known as daisy chaining, where other wholesalers link onto another wholesaler's deal with the promise that they'll find the end buyer. This is great if they actually do find the end buyer, but a lot of times what happens is they'll market the deal and another wholesaler links on. There are deals where up to 16 wholesalers have daisy chained on one deal, with some getting a decent amount and others getting very little. It is definitely possible to get the deal done with daisy chaining, but it's definitely not a good strategy. If there are a lot of daisy chainers in between the original contract holder and the end buyer, it is very possible that they could be excluded not just from this deal, but definitely from future deals to close that gap. For this particular deal, there was a lot of people who were offering to be a daisy chainer. My partner and I refused to partner with anyone else and would only talk to end buyers. Our 2 options were to either cancel the deal and get our earnest money deposit back, or to continue forward, risk losing the earnest money deposit if the deal doesn't go through, and continue to try and find an end buyer. Luckily, we decided to push through at the risk of losing our earnest money deposit. We continued to have buyers who were interested, but none who were ready to pull the trigger. The biggest issue with most of the buyers was the $40,000 entry fee, which consisted of catching up the arrears, the down payment, and our wholesale fee of $10,000. For a lot of the buyers, this entry fee was too much compared to the value of the property and the anticipated cash flow the property would generate. Finally, with about a week to spare, one of our buyers finally decided to pull the trigger with the condition that we lower the monthly payment given to the sellers along with the amount in the balloon. I called the sellers up to see what their thoughts were, and they ended up being okay with the change. So we had created an amendment to the purchase agreement and sent it to the title company to reflect the new terms. The next step would be for the buyer to submit his earnest money deposit, which was $3,000. In the case of the deal falling through, my partner and I as the wholesalers would get his earnest money deposit, and the sellers of the property would get our earnest money deposit. Luckily, that didn't happen, and the deal closed on time, and the sellers avoided foreclosure, with the buyer being happy with his new property. Overall, it was a great experience, and my partner and I made $10,000 and of course learned a lot of lessons. The biggest lesson is to have a couple of buyers lined up before you get into a deal. This will continue to get easier as you build your buyer network. Not having a buyer lined up puts you in a position similar to mine, which was very stressful until the very end of the deal. The second thing I learned is the importance of using a transaction coordinator to make sure the transaction runs smoothly. The third lesson I learned is how important it is to partner with people so that they take things off your plate and make things a little less stressful. I am forever grateful for the partner I had on this deal and what I learned from him throughout the process. And the fourth lesson I learned is that you gotta subscribe to this channel so that you can continue to receive value.